Challenging the law. Should abortion up until birth be allowed after a Down syndrome diagnosis?
I think it's discrimination. We've got a chance to live our lives.
When this law was passed, it was a time when we thought it was better for people with disability not to be born. We've moved a long way away from that now.
Powers that be see her life as worth less than is my son, who just happens to not have that extra chromosome.
We hear from Scots living with the genetic condition and their families. Good evening. A woman with Down syndrome last week lost her High Court battle in London to overturn abortion laws which she claims are discriminatory. Most pregnancies in Britain can't be terminated beyond 24 weeks, but judges upheld an exception for cases where the baby is at risk of being born with certain disabilities. Our reporter Brandon Cook has been gauging reaction in Scotland within the Down syndrome community. They say they're considering launching their own legal battle.
This was described as a landmark case, drawing media attention across the world. Heidi Crowther, a 26-year-old woman living with Down syndrome, in a legal battle with the UK government arguing her country's abortion stance discriminates against her. But after years of campaigning, Heidi's case was dismissed last Thursday. It wasn't the news she hoped for, but vowed to keep fighting.
We face discrimination every day in schools, in the workplace and in the society. Thanks to the verdict, the judges have upheld discrimination in the womb too.
Lynn Murray was outside the High Court in London that day.
We were upset. We were upset, but I think we had prepared ourselves for both things happening,
She's been campaigning for Down syndrome equality since the birth of her daughter Rachel.
She was the best baby out of all my children. And I remember my sort of initial thoughts were, what's going to happen to her when she's older? And then I thought to myself, well, wait a minute, what's going to happen to any of my children when they're older? I did worry about, I suppose, telling people and being faced with other people's reactions to the news, and I think that is what we want to change, and we want more people to understand what it is like to have a child with Down syndrome, for instance.
Why do you feel it necessary for a change in the law?
When this law was passed, it was a time when we thought it was better for people with disability not to be born. We've moved a long way away from that now, and we realise that a life with disability is just as good as another life.
The ruling itself says there's an increased risk of stillbirth for babies with Down syndrome and that they might not live long into childhood. So could you understand why some women would want to avoid this statistic?
I think what we need to be doing is we need to be better at supporting people. If we have detectable conditions, this should be leading to cures for some things and better treatments and actually better outcomes. Why are we screening? Are we screening in order to improve these situations, or are we screening in order to screen people out? This is an issue that we see as discrimination as affecting a group of people. It's not about restricting people's rights, it's just about trying to make life better for these other people and for their families, for the community.
The current Abortion Act doesn't specify what conditions justify termination beyond 24 weeks. Each case is considered by medics on an individual basis, but Down syndrome is generally included as one of them. Last week's ruling found the legislation is not unlawful and aims to strike a balance between the interests of the fetus and the rights of women. The judges said the evidence they heard powerfully showed that while some families positively wish to have a child, even if it will be born with severe disabilities, not every family will react in that way.
Support groups for parents of children with Down syndrome are vital in many ways, and over the pandemic many had to move online, but this Paisley group have agreed to meet for the first time in person for 18 months. For us, it'll be interesting to see what they make of the ruling last week. Hello. Hi everyone, how you doing? Hiya. Hello. This time last week when the ruling decision came through, how did you feel?
I cried. I was very, very upset by it, just because it's a direct slight on my daughter, you know, and that is very difficult to take.
We couldn't have made that decision about our other child, you know. So what does that say? That says that the law and that, you know, the powers that be see her life as worth less than as my son, who, you know, just happens to not have that extra chromosome.
Julie, what do you think about the current abortion law?
I think it discriminates not only against my daughter, but a number of other children with disabilities that aren't life-threatening. You know, my daughter's got a very fulfilled and happy life, and there's other people I know with other conditions who are encompassed within that law.
My daughter was born at 37 weeks, and the thought that I could have terminated her, it's just, I mean, she was perfect when she came, so it's quite horrible to think of.
Down syndrome is just one condition that constitutes for abortion up till birth. But is there any conditions or any exceptions that you could see that might merit abortion up till birth?
Oh, definitely. If it's something that's going to be really hard on the baby, if it's a life-limiting condition or something where the baby's in pain, or if it's a dangerous pregnancy for the mother, there's so many different reasons, but I just don't see Down syndrome being one of them. Times have changed so much since this law was made. Our children are thriving.
I think Heidi's case opens the door for a claimant to come forward here.
I think Heidi's leading the way for a lot more of these cases to maybe start coming forward.
So someone here would come forward as a claimant?
It's something that we would certainly, that any one of the parents that I know would take it on.
I'd love there to be a case in Scotland, and I think, you know, that may well happen. I hope it does.
All it needs is a complainer. Would you be a complainer?
I think there are a lot of us here that would be complainers. There's a whole community that would be complainers.
Removing Section 11D altogether would be challenging.
Adeline Wilson is an abortion law expert at Aberdeen University. She says the current law has prevailed under similar scrutiny before.
As a previous case in Northern Ireland found that without an equivalent, the law hadn't gone far enough to protect the woman in an instance where there had been a fatal fetal abnormality with the pregnancy and she had had to carry the infant through to term or miscarriage.
There seems to be an appetite for a clearer definition of what conditions constitute abortion up until birth. Do you think the law would benefit from one?
Well, Westminster Parliament has previously considered that as a possibility, but decided not to implement that after taking evidence from the professional medical associations. And there are three reasons why they would normally advise against that. The first is that no fixed list is going to be able to take account of the varying seriousness of some conditions. The second issue is that a fixed list of conditions is going to be very quickly out of date. And the third issue is that a fixed list is not going to be able to take account of the specific circumstances of that pregnancy, that woman and that family. And that makes it a very sensitive issue that people feel very strongly about and isn't one that's going to be easily solved.
But for some people living with Down syndrome, it's an issue worth exploring.
That's from Baxter Story.
So did you get that through your work?
Yes, I did.
Sam Ross is 33. She's worked the same job as a cleaner for 13 years and has won numerous awards for her mission in raising Down's awareness.
How does the decision at the High Court in London last week make you feel?
I find it disgusting. It's wrong. I mean, I feel angry, I feel hurt, and it's a betrayal as well. I think it's discrimination. Because we've got a chance to live our lives. We should be equal. I wouldn't want to be anything else.
It's part of who you are.
It's part of who I am, and I'm proud to be it.
Joining us from Edinburgh is Dr Katrina McMillan, an expert in medical law and ethics at Edinburgh University. And here in the studio is Eddie McConnell, the Chief Executive of Down Syndrome Scotland. Thank you both very much indeed for joining us. Now, Eddie, the law says abortion is legal up to 24 weeks. Just to be clear, you're not looking to change that. Your issue is that you don't think abortions should be possible after 24 weeks after a Down syndrome diagnosis. I think it's important just to clarify that point first of all.
That's absolutely correct, and the case that has been taken forward by these two very brave women is fundamentally around that we don't believe that disability should be used as an excuse for carrying out a termination beyond the 24-week recognised limit.
And Eddie, it is very rare, if you could just kind of give us a bit of information about this, it's very rare that this actually happens after 24 weeks. I mean, how many cases are you actually talking about here?
Well, we know from the figures available from 2018 that there were just over 3,000 terminations took place across the UK.
After 24 weeks?
No, of that number, 618 were babies with Down syndrome, and within that group is a group of about 18 that were after the 24-week period. But the concerning thing for us about that is an increase of about 42% on the previous year. So the evidence is that this is on the increase, not something that's decreasing.
Okay, Katrina, let's look at the High Court ruling from last week. Why did the judges uphold the law that says that terminations can be allowed in certain circumstances after 24 weeks?
So this is an area of law that the court tends to not stir the waters in very much, and the ruling is therefore not particularly surprising to me as a lawyer. As they state in their introduction to the case, it is not the role of the court to decide on matters of religion or ethics, and their purpose really is to decide on what is the law. And so the claimants brought this case under several headings to do with the European Convention on Human Rights. And there's two kind of broad headings under which these claims were not upheld. One is that a couple of the rights that they made the claims under, being the right to life under Article 2 and also Article 3, which is the right not to suffer from inhuman or degrading treatment. Mm-hmm. These came from the perspective of the fetus, and historically both in European human rights law and also in English and in Scots law, the fetus cannot hold rights in law. They do not obtain legal personhood until birth.
Okay, Katrina, what kind of conditions does the law say allows for later determinations? There isn't a definitive list, is there?
No, there's not a definitive list, and there's several reasons for this. It's been discussed several times in previous years. It's been brought to Parliament both in 2007 and also in 2016. And the reason that they've not given a determinative list is because, for several reasons. Firstly, because the list of things that might be seen as a serious handicap is ever expanding, and if that was to be put into law, it might very easily change over time as medicine advances. Another thing is that various serious handicaps also differ in terms of severity. So it'd be difficult to set what is and isn't necessarily serious enough. And lastly, it's been held that context is very important for this. So the life and the situation of the future mother or parents, her living situation and her health and other various factors.
Okay, Eddie, you want to get rid of the clause in the law that allows for this, but then it's not just Down syndrome conditions that would be affected. It would also affect, and I'm going to quote the law here, any condition that would cause a substantial risk that if the child were born, it would suffer from such a physical or mental abnormality as to be seriously handicapped. So you're talking about all conditions. And what effect would that have?
Yeah, I mean, that's correct. We are talking about a clause that was developed and framed in the 1960s when attitudes towards disability were very, very different to how they are today. So we don't apologise for the fact that we're tackling that very, very specific clause in the Act. We know that clause is used to allow couples to make a decision about abortion beyond the 24-week limit. And whenever I talk to families, whenever I talk to members of the public or anybody who's not from our world in terms of Down syndrome, they are all shocked that there is a provision that allows that still to happen in 2021.
But Eddie, this law does not impose abortion. It allows the women to choose in very difficult, very exceptional circumstances. Are you not taking away the right of a woman to choose?
Yeah, so this case that Heidi Crowther and Moya Brady have brought forward to the High Court was never about a woman's right to choose. These are two women who defend women's rights quite regularly and quite robustly.
You would in effect be taking away the right of a woman to choose in very difficult circumstances, and a decision that would not be taken lightly.
Yeah. So the Act itself makes provision, and maybe Katrina could say more about this, but the Act itself makes provision for abortions to take place beyond the 24 weeks in a number of other circumstances. And so it does provide for a mother who who can establish that there's going to be a significant mental or physical impact on her health and well-being. So we're not interfering with that provision. We're interfering deliberately with the very focused clause that is about disability, which communicates to the world today that disabled people are of less value.
But Katrina, the ruling mentions the need to strike the balance between women's rights and the rights of the unborn child. I mean, this is a very delicate line, isn't it?
Indeed, it is an incredibly delicate line, and the rights of the women have in this case prevailed primarily because holding otherwise could have had serious impact on not only this particular clause, which the claimant did recognise would not only extend to those with Down syndrome, but also all serious handicaps. But upholding the claims made by the claimants could also potentially have led to recognising legal personhood for fetus, which could be very dangerous for the legal rights of women to terminate pregnancies even before the 24-week point.
And we will have to leave it there, but thank you both very much indeed for joining us this evening. Now let's have a look at the news of the week with our Talking Heads.